Welcome and thank you for joining us today for From Scripts to Platforms, Why Homegrown Tools Dominate Network Automation and How Vendors Can Help. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be moderating today's event. Our featured speaker is Shamus McGillicuddy, VP of Research covering Network Infrastructure and Operations at EMA. Shamus has nearly 2 decades of experience in the IT industry. His research focuses on all aspects of managing enterprise networks, including network automation, AI ops-driven network operations, multi-cloud networking, and WAN transformation. And before I hand things over to Shamus, I wanted today's audience to know that Shamus will be concluding today's presentation by taking your questions. Feel free to log them anytime by using the Q&A functionality. Also, today's event is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email with the on-demand playback, as well as a link to this new research. So be sure to check that email out. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our featured speaker, Shamus McGillicuddy. Shamus?
Thank you, Raleigh, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Raleigh mentioned, this research aims at exploring network automation tool sets in the enterprise space and asking the question, why does a homegrown approach to those tool sets dominate the enterprise world and perhaps other worlds as well? But I looked at the enterprise for the most part, and how vendors can help. I often find that when I go to a conference that focuses on network automation, I see a lot of presentations from people who have built a network automation tool set using Python, open source software, homegrown software, and there are all these vendors that want to sell solutions to those people. And I always wonder, like, what would move the needle on that? So this research looks at that. And I want to thank the sponsors who made this financially possible, ITIL and NetBrain, two vendors that offer network automation solutions. And we're very curious to get answers to the questions I was looking to explore. So thank you very much. The agenda for today, like first off, I'm just going to sort of jump back to what I just prefaced about, like, the state of current tool sets and whatnot, and just explore like what EMA and my research practice sees in today's industry. And then just set this stage for what my goals were with this research and how I went about doing it, so that you know the context of where these insights are coming from. Then there are a lot of insights in the report that we published last week that this presentation is based upon. And there was a lot to cover, more than I could cover in a single webinar, more than you'd want to spend in a single, I could have made this a 3-hour webinar, and I decided not to because no one does that. So instead, I decided to pick 3 insights from each of the core chapters of the research to just highlight here for you. And if you want to dig deeper, I recommend downloading the report. You can either get it from one of the sponsors on their websites, or you can get it from EMA's research library, especially if you're a subscriber to our research. You can get it from our library without having to pay for it. But you can also get it from the sponsors for free. They have it on their websites. So first, point number 3 here, 3 reasons DIY, do-it-yourself tools are popular in the network automation. Point 4, 3 homegrown challenges, 3 challenges to that homegrown network automation paradigm. What causes pain to these people when they are joyfully going into a homegrown network automation tool set? And I do mean joyfully. These people like building these tools. And then number 5, 3 ways vendors can help transform DIY tool sets. Vendors are increasingly not asking you to rip out like all the work you've done if you've grown a network automation tool set from scratch using the things I described. They are interested in sort of empowering what you already have and providing a path towards something else, or something more democratized or available to people that are less technical. We'll get into it in the final section of the presentation. But anyway, what do we see in today's industry? Homegrown network automation is everywhere. Research I did last year that was survey-based. We surveyed several hundred people who are involved in network automation in the enterprise And 57% of them told us that their organizations were using open source software with no vendor support. So they're not using like open core solutions. They're using the pure open source stuff. They're not getting any sort of support from a vendor. They are going it alone. And 64% say they're using custom code like scripts or homegrown software. And incidentally, 61% of the people who told us that they had a DIY work automation tool set told us that they were devoting 6 or more hours per week to maintaining and debugging those tools, which can add up, especially if you're a small team. And I will say that most network automation teams are pretty small for a variety of reasons. Or it's a part-time endeavor by people who are not focused on network automation. They're focused on network operations and network engineering, and they implement automation in their free time to make their jobs easier. But still, 6 or more hours of maintenance and debugging per week is pretty time-consuming for a small team. All right, here's a typical DIY journey that I saw based on my research here. This might not apply to everyone. People might be in different stages of this, or they may have a stage that doesn't even fit this paradigm, but here's what I often saw. So people often start with standalone scripts. A network engineer who's like self-taught on Python maybe will start automating simple tasks using Python code. Or they might be like a dedicated network automation engineer who consults with network engineering teams and just says, hey, is there a task here that you think you would like to automate if I provided you with code for it? In these examples, script sharing of those automations can be uneven. You might have people doing duplicative work because people are just sort of automating for their day-to-day work and not necessarily taking a team-based strategic approach to it. So you might have scripts that overlap in what they do. And there's limited governance, visibility, documentation. Like people don't necessarily know what's automated because everyone's sort of automating little pieces of their jobs, or small teams automating pieces of jobs, and other teams around them aren't necessarily aware of what's happening. High code workflow orchestration is often the next tier of evolution here. The engineers start to create to automate workflows rather than tasks. They might take some of the scripts they've already written or new ones and coordinate them into frameworks, or they might open up like an open source tool like Ansible to bit playbooks that use some of the algorithms that lived in those scripts, or something in between, or both actually. Might be using scripts and playbooks. I've talked to people that do that, depending on the use case and how things evolved. Coding skills are required to build new features, integrate, and execute. Some people might not feel comfortable using this automation because there are multiple tools that involved that they have to log into and work within, execute the automation. They might feel that it's just not something point and click, and they might feel uncomfortable in it. So the ability to use it is limited, although they might use APIs to sort of drive automation through other tools to mitigate that issue. And then you have homegrown software. People are now like, at this point, they're abstracting everything in the previous tiers, like the scripts, the playbooks, so that many users don't even like have full awareness that there are scripts behind what they're doing. There's software developers in place that are, or coders. They might not think of themselves as developers. They might be self-taught coders from network engineering, but they're writing software applications that add platform features like role-based access control, scalable logging, auditing features. Any new feature will still require coding. And in this stage, like automation adoption is starting to ramp up because it's easier to use. And so any request for a new use case or new feature in that tool set can sort of pile up into this to-do list in the queue. I talk to people who are like, yeah, I'm running out of capacity to keep up with what people want me to do with the tool set I've built. So that gets to be an issue at that stage. All right, so research goals and methodology. I've kind of touched this on already, just like, will things ever change? Like what would move the needle on this DIY stuff? Do people want to get rid of it? at all? Do they want to buy? They want to be somewhere in between. Like, why do network engineers choose to buy this stuff? I mean, to build this stuff on their own when they're quite often buying commercial software for other things like observability or security monitoring, things like that. Why is this the thing they choose to do DIY? And I will say, I do encounter people who prefer to do open source and homegrown for everything. They're like, oh yeah, I don't want to work with any vendors for any management layer of my network. But that's kind of rare, and it's usually a enterprise that has really good resources for, employing people with the skill set to build that stuff for the entire management layer of your network. What are the biggest pain points of this DIY approach? Because it remains popular, but is it really like pain-free? I don't think it is, because people are still searching for the best way to. And what value can a vendor bring to such an environment to sort of, they want to sell stuff, obviously, and they think they're trying to build stuff that brings value to their customers so they can build a business. And there's this sort of in between state where people are sort of looking at each other across this gap, like, we're DIY. Well, we have stuff you can buy, and like, what can bring them together? That's what I wanted to explore with this research. And my methodology was qualitative research. Rather than survey a few hundred people and have them answer like 20 multiple choice questions, I thought it'd be really interesting to find people who are, deep into DIY network automation and just ask them all about their approach. So I conducted these deep dive interviews with 12 network automation experts. Like, these conversations were usually range from 60 to 90 minutes. These were people who were building and using homegrown and open source network automation. And this is a list of the anonymized people I talked to. So, most of them had network automation in their titles, and were network engineers who spent a lot of time on network automation. But you see renewable energy company, a European IT consultancy, a financial services company, a couple of really large universities in the United States, a collaboration solution provider, very large one, a medical and hospital network, multinational pharmaceutical company, a Fortune 500 retailer, European bank, an emerging GPU as a service cloud provider, and a mid-sized financial technology company. So lots of enterprise points of view represented here from different markets. So huge part of the conversation with these guys and women, it was not all men in this research, I'm happy to say. Why are you doing this? Like, why'd you go down this path? And most of them were well down the path. Let me tell you, like, these people weren't, almost none of these people were at the beginning stage. Like, some of them were at a beginning stage, but it was like their second or third stop on a career of doing this in different enterprises. But all of them were highly experienced with building network automation tools in-house. So the first thing they told me was IT management doesn't really it's still getting used to the idea of like network automation being something that is worth investing in from like a budget perspective. Like, it's hard to get leadership to put a line item in the budget for network automation. Because even though I feel like I've been talking to people about network automation for 20 years, it still hasn't really been like a mainstream focus for much of that. In a lot of the conversations I have had for this research and elsewhere, like, there's a sense that only in the last 1 to 4 years in a lot of enterprises has network automation become like something that people want to zero in on and be like, hey, we got to do this. And so, like, it's still new to IT budgets. Like, the CapEx that the network infrastructure operation team gets to spend is usually going to infrastructure first and foremost, and then maybe observability and definitely security. Network automation just isn't getting the respect it deserves yet. And part of it is also they told me that it's hard to justify the spend. you see this first quote here from a network automation engineer at a large collaboration provider saying that you can make a claim about risk reduction and future efficiency improvements, but it's very hard to put a dollar value next to that. I've actually done it. Usually after someone's been doing something for like a year or two, I can put a dollar value to it. But like, I guess what he's saying is like making that argument ahead of time for something we'd never spent money on, it's harder to do. Engineering teams also think commercial tools are expensive. Like they have an aversion to spending money on it because they feel like a lot of the vendors they talk to are like overcharging them for something. Whether that's true or not, I'm not here to judge. I haven't done the analysis of what people are quoting them on prices, but this guy, this network automation engineer at a large university in the United States said, our network is so large and most vendors charge per device. The average cost quoted by vendors to him, $300,000 a year. When we can do the same thing in-house, it'll take a little work, but definitely not $300,000 worth of work to get to the same place on our own. That might be debatable. You know, the vendor might argue, actually, we'll get you somewhere better. But this person thinks it can duplicate everything they need from a vendor, not necessarily everything a vendor can offer, but everything they need from a vendor for a lower price. Customizability and control was a big thing. Like I can do what I want, when I want, and how I want without a vendor sort of like putting me in this sort of, you know, uh, pipe work of workflows, widgets, components of workflows. Like I can do it how I need it when I want it. See a use case, build a solution. That's one example. A network automation director at a large university saying that these are not customizable to the granular level that we might need. He says because a vendor usually is building something for everyone's general use case, and someone might have a very specific use case. In his example was we have 50 different network automation applications used by very different teams. He was saying like I'll send out I've built a network automation application for the people who go out and like refresh switches. They're taking out old switches, putting in new ones. Then they have an app that I built that's on their iPad, and they click this and they click that, and the thing receives it is provisioned and configured and verifies that everything's wired up and configured properly, and then we're done. You can go to the next closet. I've written another application that basically allows people who are non-technical to take some sort of device that's plugged into one port and move it into another one and still have connectivity. Like, oh, I've got a projector system in this classroom. I needed to move it to this classroom. I have this printer I need to move to another office. They've automated that, and they have an app that sort of governs it. Lots of piecemeal automation that he feels like he can't get specifically in the context of the business needs that he wants to, in the business cases that he needs to deliver for specific constituencies and users from a vendor. Others say that they just want to prevent vendor lock-in. This network engineer at a multinational pharmaceutical says what's appealing about just straight Python is we're able to interface with different vendor systems and we're not at the mercy of what the vendor gives us. And he's kind of talking, in one way, he's talking about like using like the network automation capabilities that like his switching and routing vendor and Wi-Fi vendor might give him, and like, hey, like if I'm relying on that tool for network automation, like it's going to prevent me from adding a second vendor to my network because that's like a new tool set I need to deal with, right? And incidentally, I spoke to one other person for this research, not quoted on this slide, who was in the midst of switching vendors in for switching and Wi-Fi, and that was, and he had been living in his previous vendor's network automation tool set, right? His switching and Wi-Fi vendor provided him with a tool that automated a lot of things he needed to do, and the move to a new vendor. When he determined he was moving to a new vendor, he decided he wasn't going to go and like adopt that vendor's management tool for all the automation needs he had. Instead, he was adopting Ansible. He was like testing Ansible, which is a multi-vendor open source tool. And speaking of open source, this theme came up a lot. Python and open source are de facto industry standards. They're not necessarily coming from a standards body, but they are coming from a community that has basically made them de facto standards by the fact that there is a massive community using them and developing them, and supporting them. And it makes it helps them in a lot of ways listed here. Like there are no barriers to access and learning the technology because it's free. You can play with it in a lab and learn how to work with it. Whether it's Python and the various libraries that exist with Python for like Napalm and so forth, or Ansible I just mentioned or something else. There are large communities of users who share knowledge and code in places that you can review and email them about and be like, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. It's easier to hire people with these skills than it is to hire people that have skills around one vendor sometimes, unless that vendor's got a huge share of the market. You can build solutions without having to get software licenses, meaning you don't need budget necessarily, you just need your time. This is a strong selling point when coming into a new role. You can be like, hey, I can come in and just start building stuff on my own. You're not going to have to buy anything. You just got to hire me. And that advances their careers. It makes them marketable, So like, it's not just about delivering value to their business, but it's also adding value to their life and their career. And some vendors have high learning curves on their proprietary solutions, which is what this quote's about. This senior network engineer at a financial technology company said that like he had a lot of problems with the vendor he was using. That he was doing open source automation, but he had some commercial tools too, right? I'm open source and homegrown, but he had some commercial tools, and he was complaining about this one vendor that had like a proprietary query language for querying the data in their platform, and he felt like they were trying to build this walled garden that you have to plant yourself in to really get full value from the tool, and he didn't want to do that. He wanted something that was more standards based around querying, and he wants that everywhere from his whole tool set. He wants things that he can do with his knowledge and like understand right away. It's maybe too much to ask for in all aspects of network infrastructure and operations, but in network automation, it goes a long way given the culture of homegrown tools. All right, so 3 homegrown tool challenges that I am highlighting here. First, there's the human capital gap. We've been talking about how like these people, I mean, I mentioned maybe it's easier to hire people who know open source stuff in Python than it is to hire someone that knows a certain vendor that maybe has 1,000 customers or 400 customers, or 20 customers. But still, it's even in this case, it's hard to find people that who know how to do this. First of all, because like people tend to specialize in one thing or the other. They're either like experts on networking, they're experts on coding and software development. They rarely are they both. The people I talk to were usually both, but they usually said that they didn't think it was easy to find other people like them, if they needed to grow their team. Most start with one skill set and then add the other, usually in their free time, or if they work for companies very aggressive and like upskilling their people, maybe it's not in their free time. And it's like they're getting paid to do it so that they can enable the business. That would be good. But what you see is like these people that start building these homegrown tools, they want to like they recognize that the opportunity to really boost the power of what they're doing if more people in the organization are have like a similar skill set, because then like if those skills can trickle out as it says here, then you can collaborate with them and like come up with new ideas, and you can really accelerate your entire network automation project. Here's some color from some of the people I talked to. This network automation director at a large university in the Eastern United States said my most recent hire is an amazing developer, but it took about a year for him to grasp some of the network knowledge, understand what the heck he's doing. By the time I talked to this guy, though, like his developer was actually like probably the fulcrum of his entire network automation project. Like had learned networking to such an extent that he was kind of leading a lot of stuff, more so than like the network engineers on the team that had learned Python. Like he was really important to everything. He was like troubleshooting tool sets and stuff like that in a way that, like the stories I was hearing, I was just like, wow, this guy has really turned himself into a network automation developer after being just a software developer like a couple years back. And then this network engineer, a large multinational pharmaceutical, he said, it's one thing to write an awesome script. I share it with my team and they just hit run, but it's another thing entirely if I can share that script with them and we can collaborate and use that code to solve other problems. That's way more valuable. That's where he starts to sort of accelerate things exponentially when you build on top of the code you've already done. If more people can build on top of the code, understand the code, then things really take off. But it's hard to find those people. It's, you know, common theme of the conversation was like, yeah, I have a lot of network engineers. They don't know anything about coding, Python, whatever. Some of them are interested but don't have the time. Others aren't interested. They just want to keep living in CLI or whatever, or doing things the old school way. And it's hard to push the skill set out because one, there's a lack of interest, there's a lack of time, there's an intimidation factor. Like, am I going to learn this? I mean, am I too set in my ways? So it's hard to expand the team. Project complexity can be inevitable sometimes. Code sprawl gets difficult to manage. Gaps or overlaps in functionality crop up, and momentum can slow down. Like you really need really effective project management and documentation and stuff to make sure that you know what you have in place, and like make sure that you're not like duplicating your work, not missing um, parts of the feature, the use case you're tackling. This network automation engineer at a renewable energy company said, sooner or later, these tools turn into this Frankenstein's monster. Before you know it, you've got 15 Frankensteins running around with a lot of overlap, a lot of distinctness. It's kind of a hassle to build functions and make sure you can recreate them in different environments. It's like, it gets hard to reuse the code that maybe you could reuse if you had a larger team, because that team is not, maybe it's a project management issue, maybe it's just the complexity of your actual network makes it hard to build a tool set that covers everything you need to cover because the network's just too complex. There's lots of factors that go into it. But another thing that came up was security risk. I mean, most people are like, I think I'm okay about security. I think I'm okay with security. I do worry about things like I'd say like you can never be I think everyone is ultimately overconfident about their security. Like they want to say that they're not opening themselves up to potential breaches or leakage or whatnot, disruption. But when you're building a tool from scratch, like you got to be careful about how you use it, who can use it, what is in it. So like you want to make sure that you have good controls around preventing unauthorized access to the tools. You don't want to like accessible by people who might be a malicious insider or an external threat. So you want to have tight controls around who uses the automation. You want to make sure you're thinking about secrets management. You don't be putting in like um, don't put a password into a script. Most of the people I talk to never do that. But it can happen, especially if like you don't have good governance around making sure that everyone's on the same page when they're all like independently writing automation, and broken automation and errors create vulnerabilities. Like you did something that reset the password to like, 1234 on a switch or something. Who knows? This network automation engineer, the renewable energy company I quoted in the previous slide, he says you have to be mindful of not exposing secrets in the code or in the logging, especially the logging. He said, oftentimes we have pretty verbose logging in our automation that to improve processes or eliminate bugs, and you have to be very careful not to expose things in the logs, like a log that says this password was entered, something like that. All right, so the final section of the research, 3 things I cherry picked from, or well, that's pejorative. Three things I thought were interesting from the how vendors can transform the UI toolset section of the research. And first, let's say vendor. I mentioned this at the top. Like, there are a lot of network automation vendors that no longer expect you to like toss aside all the stuff you spent the last year or 10 years doing in your DIY approach to network automation. They're increasingly the fact that people have very specific, well, first of all, many, but not all, of the people I talked to for this research wanted to maintain what they already have to some extent. Some were like, I'd love to throw it all away if the vendor was awesome, you know. But most of them were like, I'm not going to throw away anything. It's like some of this is good. I mean, there's some interest. There's stuff in here I don't think the automation vendors can do or do in the way I want them to do, you know. But network automation vendors are increasingly integrating and supporting DIY tools with their platforms. Here's sort of like the disposition of some of the people I talked to towards this concept. The senior network engineer at a financial technology company says he would like a platform to onboard his scripts, stitch them together, wrap them in a nice package. I don't want to have people to log into a Linux server and run an Ansible playbook. Instead, they get this nicely named workflow with a nice GUI, and you'll see the little boxes turn green as it progresses through the steps, like enterprise grade automation. He gets it, but he also gives all of his DIY stuff. He wanted it to be packaged into something consumable and governed. Network automation engineer from a collaboration provider said, putting my code together and making it into something like workflows would be very valuable, especially if I can say, run this if this happens, and run that if happens, like more complex if then or analytically driven automation. So how can vendors help? We didn't ask the vendors how they can help. We asked these guys what they would like in terms of help. First, they want flexibility. They like the idea of no code or low code tools as opposed to their high code automation, but they don't want one or the other. They want both. Some of them actually were like, I'd love low code if it can cover all my use cases, right? But most of them are like, I can see the value of low code, no code, but I'm always going to want the high code option for power users in my team, right? So they're thinking like a single platform where you can build low and no code automated workflows using the vendor's building blocks like GUI, pre-built components, templates, whatever. Migrate, maintain, execute existing high code automation, and write new high code automation when needed. That's what they're thinking, and that's what I think a lot of some vendors are pivoting to or already doing. So, and that might be a surprise to some people, but they're gonna they're open to you working in different layers from, you know, no code, like I just turn the key and I drive, to low code or high code where like I'm actually rebuilding the engine, you know, or putting a new engine in, whatever. So network automation engineer at the renewable energy company, he says this enables folks to contribute to the same platform. That's the key right there, right? I think low code and high code are going to coexist for a long time. There's some stuff that just works better in scripts. You can test quicker. I can get information on the CLI a lot quicker. But then there's some people who just want to work in predefined workflows that they can pull together into something like that orchestrates stuff. Senior automation engineer to GPU as a service cloud provider. This is a guy who's basically mostly focused on writing automation that automated the process of provisioning new customers in his cloud. But he said, with low code, you can do maybe 80% of what you need to do, but then you have those corner use cases that require coding. Otherwise, I would embrace low code 100%. So he likes low code, but he knows that he's still going to need that high code option. So a platform that's flexible enough to do both is appealing to some of the DIY devotees, let's say. All right, logging, reporting, dashboards, visibility, audits, whatnot. This is a good thing that people could see. Like, I want to be able to track jobs better. Like, a lot of open source tools can do some of this, but not necessarily all of it in the way that they want. So they want to be able to track jobs. They want better options for troubleshooting automation errors. They want to track who did what and why. They want to demonstrate value to upper management by providing reports and dashboards that say, hey, here's how much time we saved. And here's some color. This automation and tools engineer at a large U.S. University said, being able to show upper management what is actually occurring will get buy-in. A dashboard that shows that a script saved us 15 days this year would be great. Network automation director at the other university in this study on the other side of the country said the priority is the logging. We just want to make sure things are kicking off as they should, but we also need certain requirements met regarding compliance, like PCI compliance. So he needs to be able to audit stuff that happens in his automated platform to basically say, here's what our intent was, and here's what the actual state was, and I can prove based on this information in my automation tool that has operationalized all my DIY stuff that I am compliant with PCI. Number 3, governance and security. We talked about security being a concern. They think vendors can help here. They want role-based access control that is enterprise grade, that can integrate with their identity and access management systems. They also want to change review process. Like some of them have like like they've been using content controls and stuff in some homegrown tools and review, branching and approval and whatnot, sort of like infrastructure as code, CI/CD processes. But they'd really, if they're going to adopt a vendor, they want that vendor to have really strong controls around change review. They also want integrations or native support for secrets management to improve governance and security, ensure that like the secrets never are in the scripts and whatnot. This network automation engineer at a medical school and hospital network said that you need access privileges, then you need the ability to have someone authorize changes, someone need the ability to view the code before it's merged. Like he was very much coming from a CI/CD world and really wanted a vendor to sort of provide enterprise grade controls around his DevOps oriented network automation strategy that he had built out as a homegrown network automation engineer. All right, so key takeaways. Network engineers have very good reasons for being DIY focused. The 3 that I highlighted here were like, it's just hard to get budget and justify cost. They really see the value of having the ability to control, customize their approach to automation so that they can tackle any use case they can think of in the way that they want, in the vendor they want. And they view DIY components like Python and open source as industry standards that they can build around and deliver quick solutions without having to spend money necessarily. But these tool sets are not easy to build and maintain and get buy-in from users. There are skills and personnel gaps. There are increased complexity over time as tool sets grow and have more moving parts. And there's some security risk. These people were mostly like interested in the idea of a vendor coming along and sort of integrating what they've done and adding more value. There are vendors that can quote unquote operationalize your homegrown tools and take you further and empower more people in your organization to automate regardless of their skill set. But they want the option to continue coding in Python or whatever they're using. But be able to give low code options to other people on their team that aren't coding and don't have time to learn or interest in learning. They want to get better visibility into automation for logging, troubleshooting, ROI analysis, compliance, and they want to improve governance and security. Those are some of the key things that they want from vendors. There are several others. There's several other points to all these three-piece lists in the full report, which you can download at this link. You'll get a link to it in the follow-up email, I believe. But yeah, the report will have more insights and more quotes from the people I talked to. So feel free to find it on our website or go to iTential or NetBrains websites to find it there. Hopefully they've posted it by now. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Raleigh for facilitating Q&A.
Thanks, Shamus. If you have questions, you can log them now. Jumping in, let's start with the first one. For context, what use cases were these engineers tackling with their automation?
There's a section in the report that covers that, but it varied from interview to interview. Like some people were very focused on one thing and others on another. Mostly focused on like 5 or 6 things, but there's some who are focused on just like 1 or 2 use cases. One of the things that came up the most were configuration and change management. Just that's a big one. I think a lot of people think of that when they think of network automation. Um, but also compliance and standards enforcement, like making sure the network is compliant with golden configs, with security policies, things like that was a big one. And quite often people have talked about troubleshooting. Like a big use case is just automating the process of getting data out of the network um, and into the hands of like tier one people in the NOC, Network Operations Center, is like a big win for some people. Many of the people in this study, like a script that just pulls like information from via like that would otherwise require like going into like using a command line interface to like run commands and pull the data manually. Just automating that process, dropping that stuff into a ticket, for instance, that lands on the desk of a tier one engineer who then like has the data in front of them and can start thinking about things like who should I send this to based on what I'm seeing here, or can I resolve this on my own? Other people, I mean, then there's some people who just focus on like, oh, provisioning services for a multi-tenant network. I'm like that GPU as a service cloud provider guy. And then like the people on the university side were like really focused on things like onboarding new switches, provisioning, configuring them, maintaining, updating software on like operating systems on switches, inventory management and documentation, like automating the process of pulling stuff pulling inventory data and putting it into like a source of truth or some kind. That was something people were scripting. And then like maintaining, like automatically updating documentation about the network was another thing. Like so all kinds of stuff. But yeah, the change in configuration management, the compliance and standards enforcement, and the troubleshooting were like 3 that came up most often, I think.
Thanks, Shamus. And did maintenance and supportive tools come up as a challenge with these tools?
Yeah, earlier I think at the beginning of the presentation or near the beginning, I mentioned that 61% of organizations that have homegrown automation spend those 6 or more hours a week maintaining or debugging their tools. So that, yeah, it's something that um, that is a challenge for many of these people. Like they didn't tell me they felt like it was like breaking them, but basically, like a lot of the people I talked to were very careful and comprehensive in their approach to documenting what they build. Um, and because then it ensured, or at least partially ensured, ongoing supportability of what they built. Like not everyone had that discipline in place. Um, and those with like spotty documentation were more concerned about supporting these tools into the future, especially if there was like turnover on their teams. Like I talked to one person who used to be on like a 3-person network automation team, and now they were just a team of 1, and he didn't think that anyone he didn't see a near-term future where his team was expanded. Like the people left to get other jobs, and like management didn't replace them for reasons like, oh, just want to run lean. And so like he's got a support tool set that a 3-person network automation team built, and like it reduces the amount of time that he can add more features to what they have. So if people come to him and say, can we automate this? He's like, yeah, eventually, but I'm just trying to, I'm spending a lot more time on maintaining what we already have, but I'll get to it when I can. So yeah, it's definitely an issue.
Thanks, Shamus. Were these people adopting infrastructure as code and CI/CD principles? Did that influence whether they went down a homegrown path?
I think I mentioned one of the people um, that I was quoting directly on a slide was doing that explicitly. I think it was a person at a medical school and hospital system. Some were definitely like several others were definitely integrating um, their automation with infrastructure as a code, or like really aligning with how DevOps does things. Others are more siloed and focused on scripting and software. Like they were just not really thinking about, or even like DevOps just and CI/CD and that stuff like was definitely not part of it. They were just focused on writing scripts to automate stuff and solve business problems and reduce toil for network engineering and enable end users to have a better, more responsive support environment experience. Um, so I don't think it was necessarily a main driver for homegrown tool sets, but it did. It's something that some of them like adopt as they get more mature with homegrown automation. They see maybe someone else, some other part of the organization that's doing that, and they recognize that the tools that that group is using are actually capable of like enhancing their approach, and so they start learning those processes and maybe even integrating with the other group's tools. Um, and it did definitely influence what they would require from a vendor if they were to start working with a network automation vendor to sort of incorporate homegrown tools into a network automation platform. For instance, people who have meshed themselves into like the DevOps and infrastructure as code and CI/CD will want to continue to use some of the tools that they've they've been working with. For instance, like one guy told me that if he was to use a vendor for network automation, he would not want to use that vendor's version control feature. He would want the vendor to integrate with like Git, um, and he would continue to use Git as his preferred tool for uh, version control, even if the vendor had its own powerful approach to that. He's like, I like the way Git does things. I want it to do that. So like the vendor needs to have the ability to integrate and support as much as possible. So that, that's where it doesn't necessarily lead people always down the road of DIY, but it influences how they move away from DIY to something more hybrid, where the DIY and vendor solutions converge.
Thanks, Shamus. Were there any conversations around what other productive activities they could do instead of spending X amount of hours a month on their tool maintenance?
Well, definitely like adding new features. Like if they weren't spending a certain amount of time on maintenance, then they would definitely be um, writing more code to add more features to their automation tool set. Um, Bear in mind, most of these people I talked to like were dedicated network automation engineers, so it wasn't like they would be um, like going into not, you know, sitting on an empty desk and be like, "Hey, let me contribute to answering, responding to tickets." they're they're coding all day. They are it's like okay, so yeah, they would add new features. They would also train people on how to use the tools they build and like and evangelize. Like they'd have more time to evangelize adoption to ensure that the automation that they built is getting used and like contributing the full potential value that it offers. Those are the ones that come to mind. And but yeah, like as I mentioned, that one guy who said that his team shrank from 3 to 1, like he's doing more maintenance, less ability to do any of that. So yeah.
Thanks, Shamus. That you answered all the questions, so that will wrap up today's event. I wanted to thank the audience for taking time out of your schedule to join us. As I mentioned, you will be receiving a follow-up email from EMA with resources from today's webinar, so be sure to check that email out. And I also invite you to check out the sponsor sites as well to learn more about their solutions. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.